Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show. Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark. And in this episode, I'm joined by co-hosts Phil Lindsey and Chris Mueller. From the world of Hollywood comes the sequel to one of the most successful science fiction trilogies of all time, with a hero trapped in a virtual existence he once escaped, tortured by flashes of reality and the love of his life, who he must rescue once again. We're talking about The Matrix Resurrections. The Matrix Resurrections was directed by Lana Wachowski and co-written along with Alexander Hammond and David Mitchell. It was released by Warner Brothers in the United States on December 22, 2021. The Matrix Resurrections is the fourth part of the Matrix franchise, originally released from 1999 to 2003. It is a continuation of the story of Thomas Anderson, a computer programmer also known as Neo. The original trilogy detailed Neo's removal from the Matrix, a computer simulation created by self-aware artificial intelligence that has trapped all of humanity. Neo, along with a small band of rebels that includes love interest Trinity, fight back against the machines in an effort to save what's left of the devastated world in which they actually live. Though he apparently dies in the third film, Thomas Anderson is once again alive in Resurrections and is now working as a video game creator. His claim to fame is a game called The Matrix, which is filled with references to his memories of having lived through it, which, unbeknownst to him, was 60 years ago in real-world time. Anderson is under the care of a therapist who is attempting to help him deal with his memories as Neo, all of which Anderson believes are nothing but dreams. Trinity is also back inside the Matrix, where she is now known as Tiffany. She and Thomas meet and are immediately drawn to each other, though neither one quite knows why. But Anderson is soon met with the truth that his perceived reality has been constructed and that certain figures in that reality are not what they seem. The film was met with mixed reviews upon its release and scored considerably lower than the previous Matrix films. The film was a box office flop, earning less than $157 million on a budget of $190 million. Many viewed Warner Brothers' decision to stream the movie on HBO Max as a major reason for its lackluster performance at the box office. Though the film ends with the possibility of future installments, there is reportedly no plan for sequels, though that could change depending on interest from the studio or the creators behind the franchise. Despite the film's poor reception, Resurrections is a bold move to continue the story of The Matrix, which continues to entertain fans all around the world. And that's the lowdown on The Matrix Resurrections. So we did the Matrix episode here on the 6M, and it was a good episode. I enjoyed it. Phil hit me with a lot of different fan theories and some theories he had himself about the story and what it really meant, and subtle nuances contained within the film from start to finish. To be quite honest with you guys, a lot of things that I had never really thought about or put two and two together before. But the idea of, the internet's taking over and then we compare and took notes between the time the movie was released to this time now, and how a lot of that stuff is actually coming true. And it was fascinating to go back and watch that film again, to do a show on it, and again to discuss fan theories, because as I said, I had heard just rumblings over the years of some of them, but never to that degree. So I thoroughly enjoyed doing that episode because I learned something, and it made me think about the film in a whole new way. We never covered 2 and 3, mostly because I don't think Phil was a huge fan of either one, and to be quite honest, neither was I. But we are going to talk about a sequel here today, kids, and I would tell you that I would know what Phil and Chris both are thinking, but I don't really. So this is going to be fun for everybody, and hopefully everyone gets something out of this. So right out the gate, Phil, I got to ask you again. You and I did the 6M on the original Matrix. What's your feelings on this film as we get started here today? What's your overall take on this movie?
I was actually surprised how much I didn't like it. I didn't think this was a good movie. I actually kind of feel like it's the worst one.
Wow.
It's just not good. Like, I feel like there's stuff they try to do here that it just doesn't really work. And I mean, I think it's hard to come off a movie as good and as influential as that first movie and make sequels to it.
Mhm.
But at least the second and the third one, like I could feel like, okay, well, it's the ending of the story. Like this felt wholly unnecessary.
Yeah, and not to jump too far ahead or anything and ruin it. By the way, kids, tons of spoilers here in case you didn't know. Now you know. But the ending of this movie felt like, okay, well, what happened then? Like I was kind of waiting, and it does feel like another one's coming, even though there's conflicting reports about that. Um, at least with the first trilogy, I felt like they were heading toward the goal of disassembling the Matrix and bringing it down. But then we come to find out, nope, not only has it not been brought down, it's bigger, it's better than ever. And man, is it more intricate than it ever has been. And now there's all kinds of different stuff. Like the Matrix program itself has evolved over time. I mean, I don't know. We'll get into the plot here shortly, but I just feel like there was nothing accomplished here at all, which is very odd to me. Did you was that your takeaway of this film? Was that there was just nothing accomplished here?
Yeah, this felt very unnecessary. Like this felt like a very unneeded sequel.
Mhm.
Um, and you can make that argument for the other two, but I felt like this was even more so. Like it felt like they tried to do an epilogue for the first trilogy, and it just doesn't even work well as an epilogue.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Um, yeah, I just don't know if anything got accomplished here, and it's hard to make that blanket statement, right from the jump. But honestly, that's kind of where I'm at. Um, I would say, for me personally, that the two best characters obviously are going to be Neo and Trinity. They make this film. If there's anything positive to be said about this movie, depending on your viewpoint out there, for me it's Neo and Trinity. They absolutely make it at least worth watching. Um, it's funny how he looks kind of just like John Wick in this movie, which that's okay. But there's moments where I'm like, wait a minute, is it this? It's in the John Wick universe, and then like Trinity's still in the Matrix as Keanu Reeves is or as Neo is, which is kind of a that screws with you also. That messes with your mind because you're like, man, what is going on here? Um, this idea that Neo is a game developer and the Matrix is a video game. It's a trilogy of video games that he did. And dude, felt like they referenced the trilogy in this movie. It's almost like this movie is just very self-aware because they mention bullet time, they mention the characters, they mention Agent Smith, Morpheus, everything's there as if the movie is talking about itself. Were you on board with that or did it just feel weird to you?
There's a lot of meta commentary in this thing. There's a lot of breaking the fourth wall,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I feel like it misses what made that first movie so interesting and so thought provoking. Um, I think the biggest issue I have with this movie is it just doesn't feel like a good story. It just feels like more or less commentary on the first three movies.
Yeah, as if it's a not director's cut, but yeah, like a commentary. That's the best way to put it, like a making of thing or something. It just doesn't feel like a continuation. I mean, that's the problem, right? It's not a continuation of the story. It's more of a rehash of what we've already seen, um, which is very odd. Uh, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. So, um, Chris, let me ask you. Right, and Phil's not crazy impressed with it, and in fact, for him, it wasn't a very good movie. I'm not going to say I'm in love with this film. I'm watching it again for the second time because, to be quite honest with both you guys, this film felt a lot smarter than I am, and that's okay. Like I don't have to get the gag every time, but like, man, at some point, I'm like, God, am I just not tuned in? Am I missing something? There was many, many points. I went back and watched again thinking, okay, I've missed something. This is completely over my head. Chris, did that happen with you when you watched this movie? Did you feel like it was over your head?
No, I felt like the movie thought that it was. So here's what I think about this movie. For one, I think this movie it falls right in the middle of the Matrix. It's like I didn't like it like I liked the first one because I saw the first one in theaters before all the hype had started, and I
Mm,
loved it. And I was like, this is what action movies should be. Like, this is amazing. Second
mm,
one, diminishing returns. Third one, hated it. So for this one, it was like it kind of fell right by the second one for me. Like, it was okay. It felt like a Matrix spin-off almost to a degree. Like, but I feel like they tried to pack so many different ideas into this that none of them were properly serviced. Like,
mm.
there was, if you had stretched it out in a satisfying way, this could have been the first two movies of a trilogy.
Mm.
Because I feel like the most interesting part of the movie to me was maybe the first half hour or so. So let's say you take all the stuff with Bugs and Morpheus out of that, and we just follow Thomas Anderson. They could have made a whole movie out of questioning whether anything that we saw in those first three movies happened or that was all part of this crazy dude's video game. Like, they could have made that into a big mystery box and made us question whether any of that stuff happened or if it was just all from his imagination.
I think you just made a better movie. I like your movie better. That's actually really
But
good.
like, they tease that idea and then they don't go full bore with it, and then they just immediately
Yeah.
confirm, oh yeah, Matrix is real, all that happened, blah blah blah. So they moved through what could have been a satisfying 2-hour movie in 30 to 40 minutes while also showing us that stuff going on with Bugs finding Morpheus and breaking him out of his little program, that we already know that he's not crazy. There's no question in our minds. So
Mhm.
it felt like a lot of that stuff with Neil Patrick Harris and the blue pills and all that, it was more Lana Wachowski trying to make a point about something and missing the mark than it was creating an actual mystery around whether this guy had these experiences and is now plugged back in, or was what we saw all just a narrative this dude came up with and now he's experiencing something else. I don't know. I just think that there was a lot of interesting things that they started and then never went through with.
Phil, could you get on board with this movie having been the entire movie as Thomas Anderson trying to make sense of whether or not any of that was real, and maybe the final scene of the movie is a glimpse of the actual Matrix, and it turns out he was right the whole time? I mean, that would have been a maybe a far more intriguing film. Yes.
Yeah, I think if you turned this into like a big suspense thriller, it would have been much more interesting. Um, but instead, we got all of the formulaic action scenes and all of the cliche stuff from the original trilogy, and I felt like that was the most disappointing thing about watching it is watching things that were extremely influential when the Matrix first hit get turned into like something that looked fairly cookie cutter, and it's like, man, that's it's just sad to see where the franchise is going, man. And I mean, it's weird that they essentially turned this into a love story. That's essentially what this movie is.
Yeah.
It's a love story.
I I don't hate that part of it. Because if you're going to have Neo and Trinity in a film together, and again, for me personally, they're the two biggest reasons to watch this movie because the moment they share the screen, they have instant chemistry. It's not even really trying hard with these two, and they're fantastic. I'm okay with that to a certain extent, but yeah, when the background characters and the situation and the story and the plot all revolves around, well, we just got to get these two back together. Yeah, but then the world that you spent so much time creating in the first trilogy is you're just wiping it out, whether you know it or not. I mean, Chris, what about the idea of Neo and Trinity being the two? the two reasons to watch this film in terms of them versus the new cast that we've been introduced to. Let's say Neo and Trinity weren't in this film and it was about finding Neo and Trinity. Do you think this cast together with the way it's written, do you think it would have been enough to hold the film, or should there have been more character development with the cast that we're introduced to here in this film?
Well, that was another sticking point for me. I feel like if I think about it, I can remember the name and character traits of every character from the first movie. They did such a good job establishing who everybody was. Like the little scene with Joe Pantoliano sharing his, homebrew alcohol with Neo, like that was more character development in that one scene than it felt like anyone else on the crew other than Bugs got in this movie. Now,
Yeah.
I do think there were some interesting characters. I like Jessica Henwick as Bugs. I just like Jessica Henwick in general. Like, she's the best part of Iron Fist. I was really happy to see her get this opportunity to play such an important character in a big movie.
Mhm.
And I would love for her to show back up in the MCU. That being said, they did not do enough to make her feel like a character that has her own story. Like, she's just there to tell Neo what's changed. She felt like a plot device after a little while, as did Morpheus. More like what they did with Morpheus was not that interesting to me. Now, going back to what you said about like, are Neo and Trinity enough for this movie? They were the strongest part to me. Like, I like Keanu Reeves and Carrie Ann Moss together. I think that there was something, I do think that there was one interesting thing that they did in this movie, and they sort of established that yes, Neo is the one, but the one is not just Neo. The one is Neo and Trinity, and it sort of speaks to that trans allegory that the Wachowskis have talked about, how these movies are one big trans allegory. Like, the duality of the one is the man and the woman. Like, it's never just been Neo. Like, Trinity's always been part of this. And if you even go back to the original movies, like, the Oracle told her, like, you'll know what's the one because you'll fall in love with the one. But it's really the fact that it's like the two of them are connected in such a way that they're both equally important. So I like that this movie ended with her being just as powerful as him. Like, that I thought was a very good direction to go. Everything leading up to that felt like studio notes to me. Like, and I gotta say, my biggest gripe is that I'm sure Jonathan Groff is a fine actor. I can't think of anything else I've seen him in because he's kind of just a generic white guy with a short haircut. And there's a lot of those in Hollywood. But like, he is no Hugo Weaving. I'm sorry. There is nobody out there right now who I feel could have matched Agent Smith. And I think they should have just gone with a different program, because you can't beat Hugo Weaving's Agent Smith. You just can't. Like, he is so iconic as that character. And you don't even get a guy whose voice is as intimidating. Like, come on. I'm sorry. That just felt like a huge miss in casting to me.
And to your point, when it's revealed, I was sitting there watching it going, that's Smith? What? Like, I couldn't. I'm like, come on, you got to be kidding me. Like, I don't expect him to look just like Hugo Weaving, but he can't even be similar. He can't, like you said, can't even sound. Oh, that just seemed, that seemed like a miss. The callbacks to other characters, the Morpheus thing, Fishburne not being involved this time around, and Yahya Abdul-Mateen, who we know from Watchmen, who was, of course, Dr. Manhattan, who is freaking fantastic. And I really love this guy. I thought with the way the character was written and what he had to do, he was great. I actually loved him. Do I think that he's Morpheus? I don't know. I don't know, because it's hard to live up to a role that was made so iconic in the first, I keep saying the first trilogy as if there's going to be two more. We don't know what's going to happen here. But do you think there's too many callbacks, Chris, to the other movies? Do you think there's too many, actually?
No, because I think if you don't put him in, people are going to be pissed either way. But I think the mistake or not the mistake, um, the thing that they did that sort of allowed them to make this Morpheus different is this isn't Morpheus. This is a program Thomas Anderson created that's like sort of a shell of Morpheus and Agent Smith. He's just clearly more Morpheus than Smith. So, like, he basically created, a fully functional AI somehow, and they just pull it out of the Matrix and turn him into a bunch of ball bearings, which we got to talk about that at some point. That was, yeah. But I think that was one thing they did I thought was kind of creative, was like, okay, this isn't Morpheus, that this isn't the same character. He didn't have those experiences. This is a new character who's just using that name because that's the name that Thomas Anderson gave him in his little game. So I felt like that was them writing themselves out of a corner in a pretty decent way. They just, like I said, there's things they could have done that would have been more interesting than what they did.
Phil, what about for you? Do you think the callbacks to the original cast, recasting these roles, was it necessary? Do you think they could have just, spoke about the cast, the original characters, but not recast them? What do you think they could have done here?
I think some of the callbacks were interesting, but I also think some of the callbacks are what stopped this from being a really fully formed movie. Like, it felt like, let's do all the hits, guys. Let's remind them of things from the other trilogy, and none of it is really that interesting. Like I some of the stuff with Morpheus is cool and all, but like I was sitting there looking the whole time, like it's taking me out of the movie. Like like I was not engrossed in the story they were trying to tell. And like I feel like the best callbacks they did was like just a surprise with having Niobe back. Like I feel like she's one of the few characters that came back that actually had like a story and a character. Like I feel like Chris is spot on in the sense that like a lot of the characters in this movie are just plot devices. They are there to get us from A to B. They don't really have any real motivation outside of that.
Yeah. This and again, I like that you mentioned the plot devices and all that, because there's a lot of things in this film that feels like, well, like you said, we got to get from here to here. So what do? Well, let's have him say this, and have this character do that, because it does feel like we're just, and that's the danger of any sequel, right? Is that you're going to mimic the one before it, that came before it, too much. You're going to rely on the trusted themes that made the first film a hit, or whatever, and it's going to be just a carbon copy of the one before it. I mean, the action is still right. It still looks good. The effects are great. There's nothing. I have no argument personally with any of that stuff. But the bullet time has been used and overused and overdone so many different ways. So many different films now through the years. I mean, different properties have taken it, the idea of it, and all that stuff. But I get it why they're doing it here. They even mentioned the words bullet time, which is very odd to me.
I chalked that up to being, that's a term from his video game.
Right, of course.
Yeah. The callback that I really hated, like it like made me groan when it happened, is Morpheus walking out of the toilet and giving the callback. I hated that.
Yes. What was it? He says, finally. Was that what he says?
Yeah, it was like him trying to do this bad Fishburne impersonation, and like it was just way too self-aware for its own good. It was so self-aware that it didn't feel like interesting meta commentary. It felt like a parody.
Yeah. And plus the fact that it's been 60 years since the first Matrix. Like they see he sees the Trinity's reflection on the table, and she's an old woman. He sees his own reflection as people actually see him. He's an old man, but yet in actuality, they don't look like they've aged that much at all. Was there an explanation given as to why they didn't age, or because the only thing I remember them saying was that we don't know why you haven't aged or whatever, but it's actually been 60 years.
I do remember them saying something about like they're in special pods. So
Ah.
perhaps the reason their physical bodies haven't aged that much is because they are doing something to keep them alive. Because they're the one thing that I got out of this movie about why they're still keeping them alive is like somehow Trinity and Neo produce a shitload of power just by being near each other, but not actually being together. Like I think Neil Patrick Harris says something like that. And so they had to go out of their way to create these two special pods in this secret area of one of the towers. And one of the things that struck me as weird was when Neil Patrick Harris was like, it was really expensive. It's like, what do you don't use money. What are you talking about? Like, did it use a lot of power? Like, what does that line mean? That's makes no sense. I actually liked Neil Patrick Harris in this. I thought he really ate up the role and like took it seriously and clearly brought his acting chops to this and tried. And I thought he was a good part of this movie. I didn't think it was necessarily satisfying the way they described why he's in control and it's not the architect from the first trilogy anymore, but whatever.
Mm-hmm. Well,
one thing we do need to talk about though is how generic the action was in this in comparison to the first movies.
So do you think it mimics too much? It's just the same formula? Is that what you're going for here?
I mean, a lot of it is. A lot of this movie feels like the first movie, but not in as good of a way. Like, it feels like they repeat a lot of those story beats, but they try and make them different. And in that way, it's just like, oh, well, I've already seen this, but I saw it in a better way originally.
Yeah, this was somebody copying somebody's homework without actually understanding like all of the thought process and intricacy that went into it. This is absolutely what
maybe the secret was the other Wachowski, Lily. Maybe Lana wasn't the one who contributed the best parts. I don't know. I could be totally wrong.
Maybe this whole movie is a meta commentary of her basically telling us, I can't make this movie without the other one. Like, we have to be together. That's the true power of this trilogy.
Oh, man.
Then don't make the movie.
I mean, the first 40 minutes or so, I feel like she's all but telling us, I didn't want to make this movie.
But Warner Brothers was going to anyway. They literally call out Warner Brothers.
Oh, my God, they do.
There's several points at the beginning of this movie where it's just like they're basically talking to us from behind the fourth wall, going, "Hey, we didn't want to make this movie, but here we are."
But I do remember reading an interview a while back where Lana was like, "This is something I've been thinking about for a long time," and something happened, like they lost their mother or something really personal happened where Lana said, like, "I have a story that I want to tell. Lily's satisfied with where we left it, so it's just going to be me." But I don't know if that was that a commentary just on sequels in general and how studios work, or was that because I don't think Warner Brothers would have allowed them to keep a jab like that in unless it was not their intention to reboot it without them. I don't know. It's a very weird situation that I'm curious to hear about over the years that pass. Like, will Lana Wachowski come out and be like, oh, yeah, that was me making fun of them because they were going to do that anyway?
Well, Reeves' story is that supposedly she contacted him, reached out to him, and pitched this idea. And he said, well, I thought Neo was dead. And she goes, yeah, but what if he's not? And so that got his attention. He goes, okay, you have my attention. Please go on. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. And I'm thinking, well, if I'm in his shoes, I'm like, hey, I kind of like that. What if he's not? Let's go from there. Well, but I don't know. Where do you go from there? My God, you killed him in part 3, or at least we thought you did.
Well, I mean, he's always been a Jesus parable, right? So resurrection is kind of part of the deal.
And he's got the hair and the Jesus beard too, let's be honest. So
Yeah, this is full on John Wick Keanu, and I love it.
yes, same here. Yeah, yeah, too much fourth wall, guys. Is that what we're saying? Is that one of the biggest problems with this film overall? Is that it knows what it is too freaking much? Maybe it just becomes too maybe annoying is the word. It just becomes too much. Damn, it's like stop knowing what you are. Just tell the story. Is it getting too wrapped up in that part? You think?
I definitely think this movie thinks that it is a lot smarter than it actually
That's
is.
exactly what I said. Yeah.
I think that this movie thinks that it's making like this very interesting commentary on the first trilogies, and like I said, I feel like it tries so hard to be commentary that it doesn't actually create an interesting story. Like, what is the story of this movie? Like, I came away thinking that, like, okay, what is the story that they had to find their way back to each other?
Pretty much.
I think so, yeah. And plus all these delusions he's supposedly having where he thinks he's having a break from reality, that's all coming from the Matrix because they're trying to keep him confused and they're trying to keep him from remembering, right? So it's intentionally messing with him to begin with.
Yeah, and see that's and I mean I know this, I said this earlier. I think it's very odd to try to take everything that was interesting about those first three movies and turn it into essentially a love story. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if it was a good love story. Like this doesn't even feel like a good love story. It just feels like, hey, they got separated, they have to get back to each other. Like I feel like all of like Twin Flames internet that believes in like twin flames is like, oh, this thing is speaking to me.
You're not here for the love story, man. Come on. It's Neo and Trinity, man. How can you not be
No.
in their corner? These two crazy kids with their trench coats battling
Well, they
battling
definitely,
crazy AI.
They definitely went from like I don't know you to oh I remember everything and love you again real quick.
Real quick.
But that's why
Yeah,
I'm saying
but
like all that should have been the movie. Like it all should have been in the Matrix following the two of them. Thomas is trying to figure out like did I know her in a previous life? Did I base the character in the video game off her? Or are my delusions just pasting themselves onto her and I'm turning her into the object of my own obsession? Like, you could have made a super interesting psychological mystery movie with no action, and it would have been brilliant. And frankly, I think that's the route they should have went because the action in this was like a C+ compared to the original movie. The original movie had the benefit of having the greatest action choreographer of all time, Yen Wu-ping. This is the guy who's responsible for Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, some of the greatest Jet Li kung fu movies out there. Like, he is a legend. And that's why you go back and watch the original movie, and there's these long, complicated routines of 10 to 12 moves in between each camera cut. This movie feels like any modern action movie where it's punch, punch, cut, punch, kick, cut, punch, punch, cut. Like, I'm sure all these people worked out and studied and trained hard, but the fight scenes did not have that kinetic feel that they got in the original movies.
Yeah.
So they iron fisted it is what you're suggesting. They Danny Randed it. Is that what they did?
A little bit, but like even some of the stuff in Iron Fist was more creative than this. Like Chad Stahelski's the one who did the action in this. He's the guy behind John Wick. Like he knows how to choreograph good fight scenes, but he's not Yen Wu-ping. Like this felt like a completely different style of action, and that's I think the mistake was not getting another prolific martial arts action guy. Let's be honest, like the Hong Kong action is different than the American action. They should have gone back to Hong Kong and gotten another Chinese action choreographer who was similar to Yen Wu-ping, because they should have tried to recapture that feeling with the fight scenes, and we just didn't get it.
You know what this movie feels like the more and more I think about it? I recently rewatched Dark Knight Rises, and there are certain things about that movie that have not aged well. And I think the the biggest mistake they make with the movie is after everything, we see Alfred go and he is sitting at that cafe and he looks up and then you see Bruce is across and he nods at him to let him know that he's okay. And he's sitting across from Selena. And it's like we got the happy ending tacked on to the end of that movie. And it just felt so completely unnecessary. Like it's so much better if we just see Alfred sitting there and he looks up and then they cut to credits and we don't know what he sees because it's open for interpretation. And I feel like that's exactly what this movie is. It's trying to tack on this happy ending for Neo and Trinity that we just don't need.
And listen, remind me, because I'm such a blank on part 3 here. So at the end of part 3, the Matrix has not been taken down.
No.
It's still running, right?
Correct.
Right.
He just brokered peace so the machines would leave the humans who had freed themselves alone. And apparently they were like given the ability to give people the choice, and if they chose to leave, they were supposed to be allowed to leave, and if they didn't choose to leave, then they would be able to stay and keep powering the Matrix.
Yeah.
But like Trinity's death I thought was pretty conclusive. But again, these are like partially mechanical bodies, so them being able to reanimate them and remake them does make a little bit of sense narrative wise. But like I was always under the impression that Neo got reabsorbed into the Matrix somehow. I thought the third movie made it pretty clear that he wasn't just discarded. Like, I don't know. I thought that was always obvious, and I'm not surprised to see him back. It was Trinity that I was shocked. I thought Trinity was going to be the Oracle, and that Oracle had taken on her form in order to be recognizable to Neo. I was totally wrong about that. There was no Oracle. All we got was Priyanka Chopra playing that little girl from the train station in the second movie.
Yeah. What about so we've mentioned Neil Patrick Harris. Neil Patrick Harris should be on the dollar bill at this point. This guy is a freaking treasure. I'm sorry. I love this guy to death,
He's great
man.
in this. Like, he genuinely puts forth a good effort and a good performance in this movie.
Yes. Phil, what's your thoughts on the smiling villain, the smug, confident, cocky, smarmy, maybe you could say Seth Rollins-esque villain of Doogie Howser himself here, Neil Patrick Harris. What'd you think?
Howser. I thought he was good in this with what he was given to do. But again, I just feel like there are just certain things about this movie that just misses the mark on what made the first movie so good. I think having, this like very, smarmy, wink, wink at the camera villain, it's just too on the nose, in my opinion. And that's not to say that, again, that, Patrick did a bad job here. He did a great job. Neil Patrick Harris is fantastic in almost everything he's in. But I just feel like what is the point of his whole character? It's just essentially he is there to keep them apart. That is his entire role in this movie.
Well, it was my understanding that he was sort of the creator of this version of the Matrix too.
Well, sure, but I just mean in the grand scheme of this movie, it's like if his conquest is to keep them apart enough and keep them in that tower to power, the machines and create this new Matrix, it's like, all right, what exactly is the rest of his motivation to taunt Neo for the entire movie and be his, psychiatrist and all this other stuff? It was like, okay, yeah, it's like he's won, but he's essentially toying with them the entire movie. It's weird.
Yeah, it as his therapist, and I got to tell you, he is so good in my opinion, and he's so convincing that when he's talking to Neo, and Neo's like, well, nothing happened at the building because nothing happened. I imagined the whole thing. It's am I crazy? And they almost had me. I swear to God, they almost had me because I didn't know what was going on anyway. I couldn't piece it together anyhow. Like you guys said, yeah, obviously we know the Matrix is a real thing, blah, blah, blah. But he was so good in that moment. I thought, are they going to take this another way and just completely mess with you and say, yeah, the other three movies didn't really happen after all? Like, I don't know. Would you have been satisfied with that? Let's say they went completely off on a tangent and went that way. Would that have been like, oh, come on, you're gonna like, say that the other three never happened? You're like, or would that have been just a much different outcome and would have been, hey, that at least they did something different?
I think that would have pissed more people off than anything
Yeah.
else. Like, I think the idea of making a movie that questions whether those, like I was saying, like that would have been a much more interesting movie if we were questioning that the whole time. But had they actually done that, but then tried to say like, oh, those movies were just his video game idea, but the Matrix is still real, like that would have just been too weird. People would have been like, well, now you're just taking these things that got you to this point and saying they don't matter so you can do whatever you want, which that wouldn't have been a satisfying way to go.
It's like the old idea that's been circulating online for years that, Batman never happened, that Bruce Wayne's been in an insane asylum since his parents were murdered in front of his eyes, and he created the entire world of Batman and the Joker and the villains and the capes and the costumes and the Batcave. It's all created in his mind. And like the Joker is his doctor and Two-Face is the head of the hospital and all these people are actually in.
I've never heard this before. They think it's like a Tommy Westphal
dude, like
thing.
the whole, he imagined the whole thing. And Phil, am I crazy in thinking they actually someone took that and incorporated it into like an Elseworlds novel or something, or am I wrong about that?
I don't know if I've ever heard a book about it, but I have heard people that, have this interpretation. It's kind of like the series finale of Roseanne, where we find out like nothing in the final season actually happened. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I feel like they could have done something interesting with that and make us question, did the movies actually happen? And, what do we actually believe? Because I think that's what's so interesting about the first movie is there's so much in that first movie that's up for interpretation. Like, I feel like for the most case, everything in this movie is pretty straightforward. And I feel like that's kind of to its detriment.
Because
Yeah, exactly. They didn't make enough intrigue to keep you interested. Like the first movie had the benefit of us not knowing anything about this world. Now that we all know so much about it, they didn't do enough to make us question what we knew.
Or really care about what was happening, to be honest.
I do love some of the things they threw in. I love the idea that at one point the machines fought each other for space and for bodies, for power. That was fascinating to me.
That's interesting. And that could have been the sequel. That we could have learned about that time. And like they could have made a whole movie based around what Niobe and everybody else was going through during that period building Io. Like there's so many more interesting movies that could be made from the ideas contained within this semi-interesting movie.
Well, Chris has laid out sort of his blueprint, which I freaking love his ideas here. What's your pitch? Let's say this thing's handed to you and they're like, hey, Phil, give us your pitch, man. Sell this to. What would you do with these characters? We're going to do it either way, but you pitch to us. What would you do? What would be your answer?
My pitch would be for Lana to take her briefcase and walk out of Warner Studios and not make this movie.
Okay, but besides that,
yeah, I don't know. It's tough because the movie is so heavily based on being in the Matrix and the idea of the Matrix. And I feel like once you destroy the illusion of what the Matrix is, it's hard to keep going back to it. And that was kind of the problem with the first two movies. I mean, well, the first three movies, I mean, because it's like once you establish after that first movie, like this isn't real, you're in virtual reality. It's like, okay, then why do we need to keep going back to it then? And I do agree that there's an interesting movie in Neo being jacked back into the Matrix and living a normal life and maybe understanding that, he did everything he could and not wanting to get out of the Matrix and, getting to that point at the end of the movie. I do think that there's an interesting, like, psychological movie to make with that. But the problem is, like, this is now known as an action and sci-fi franchise. And so, if they tried to make like this, suspense movie with it, it probably wouldn't have gone over well with people.
You know what they should have done? This should have been like a big budget 6-part mini series. And then they could have devoted different episodes to different things.
I do think there is a way that they could have done essentially what Watchmen did, and did like a HBO Max show, and had it not necessarily based around Neo, but all of these characters that were influenced by the original trilogy. And not necessarily do like anthologies, but do like kind of like essentially what Watchmen did, where you had all these characters that have their own stories, but they all come together for a main story arc.
And maybe have Neo show up in the final scene like Luke did in The Mandalorian, and just lead to something else.
Mean, the thing that we get to at the end could have been, freeing him and Trinity from the Matrix.
Right.
Because I just don't feel like that idea of them being in the Matrix again and just getting them back together again is an interesting enough concept to make an entire movie around.
That was going to be my next question. It's cool that we took it here. My next question is 2 parts. One, does this franchise continue? And number 2, if the answer is yes, does the Matrix need to come down? I mean, I go back to the original Star Wars, and I it's not that I don't like the new content. I do. It's not that I don't like the new trilogy. I do. But at the same time, the old school fan of me is like, dude, you killed Vader. Vader's dead. The Emperor's dead. The Death Star #2 dead. All gone, dead. Everybody's dead. Okay. And you mean to tell me that's not enough? Oh, okay, cool. So now they're going to come back again with bigger ships and another dude with black on. And it's almost like, no, Luke did enough. That trio did enough to bring it down. That should have been the end of it. And it's almost, to me, it feels like, well, the Matrix has to come down, because otherwise you're telling me that Neo's not the one, Trinity's not the one with him. They're not strong enough. No one will ever be strong enough. This thing is doomed. It's like The Walking Dead. There is no hope in The Walking Dead. Sorry to spoil it for you kids. Don't waste your time. There's no hope. There's no good ending to this show, right? So like, if there's no end of the Matrix, why are we still going back to this world when humans are obviously will never win? So, Phil, do you continue the franchise? And if the answer is yes, does the Matrix have to come down at some point?
I don't think that you continue the franchise. I think you stop it here. I think you really should have stopped it after the first trilogy. I mean, you can make a real argument that you should have stopped it after the first movie. But we know how this goes. Once a studio has IP that is popular and it makes money, then we got to keep going back to it because it's a cash cow. And I feel like The Matrix was just so much more interesting as just like this, high idea sci-fi movie. And I feel like it has long gotten away from what that was.
What do you think, Chris?
Well, I know that this is still considered the pandemic era, so they take the box office with a grain of salt, but this movie cost $190 million. You usually double that for marketing. So you're talking, this movie should have had to make more than $380 million to make a profit. So far, it's only made $106 million. I don't know if it still has a lot of markets that needs to release in around the world, but my guess is this movie is going to be a loss for Warner Brothers financially. And that is going to lead to the not getting any more of this. Or I could see Warner Brothers going in a different direction with the franchise, either doing something with unrelated characters, either in a TV series or another movie, or maybe moving into animation. Like, people loved the Animatrix, so you could always do like a what if style thing and do just a bunch of disconnected stories and see which ones people like, and then make a show or two based around those. Like, they already have this Matrix video game demo that just came out that has impressed the hell out of everybody who's played it. So like it looks like the future of this might also lie in video games.
What's funny is when I was watching it at the beginning, it felt very much like one of those Star Wars movies that exist in the same universe, and they're giving you all this exposition and trying to tell you everything about this universe, and trying to reintroduce you into the conflict. It felt very much like somebody who watched the Matrix movies trying to create an interesting spinoff to it.
So it's like a Timothy Zahn novel, is what you're telling me. Is that what we're saying here?
Maybe
Except Zahn
I
may
don't
be a
know.
much better writer, honestly. So
Yeah, I don't know. We clearly haven't talked about the biggest cameo of this movie that I sat back in my seat and I was like, "What?" And that's Thelma Hopkins here as Freya, and I was like, "What? This is not Rachel from Family Matters."
God, good call. Yeah, there's just I don't. There's moments. I mentioned Star Wars. There's moments when it kind of feels like the cast around them has that. Oh, look, we've seen Han for the first time. Oh, we've seen Luke for the first time. Almost like Neo and Trinity are legends. And 60 years ago, the stories started being told about these two and everything. And then like he can't fly, and he can't really do much, and she can do more than she thought she could. He can stop bullets, man, and he's stopping rockets from helicopters and whatnot. But like, I don't know. I expected the typical. Here's Neo completely killing it, dodging bullets and kung fu, and we didn't get that guy. So like, the way this movie ends, dude, I'm telling you, it just feels like, wait a minute, that's not that I'm sitting here saying, oh man, I wish there was more movie, but the way it went off, I'm going, wait, that's it? That's all that happens? Like they didn't stop it. They didn't, at least temporarily, they didn't release more people from pods. What's going on? Like I was left wondering, what's the next step? I'm telling you, I don't think this is over, man. Am I crazy here or what?
Well, it feels like they wanted to set up more, but I just don't think they'll get the chance to follow this up directly.
Yeah.
It felt very open ended, and I think that was intentional. But if that's the ending and that's the pitch, I don't want it. I don't want any more.
I will say that the part when Neo tried to fly and couldn't did get a chuckle out of me. Just because Keanu Reeves pulled it off, where he's like, yeah, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But
no, yeah, there are entertaining aspects of this movie.
Yeah.
But I just still feel like, for the most part, this movie was just wholly unnecessarily. Like, and I mean, even like some of the stuff with Naomi was interesting. Like, I don't know if we're supposed to get the idea that her and Freya are in a relationship. Is that what we're supposed to get from their
think
scenes?
so, actually.
I kind of got that impression, but they never quite went through with it. There was also supposed to be a character, and I could never quite figure out if this was true or not. Lana had said that there was going to be a character who was either male or female outside the Matrix, but the opposite inside the Matrix, and it was like because they were trans and the Matrix built them with the wrong body or whatever.
Oh.
And I couldn't figure out if that actually happened with any of the characters.
God, I actually really love that idea.
Like I said, there's interesting ideas in this movie that they touch on and never get into. And I think part of this has to do with, I don't know if you guys have done much research into this, but apparently most of the original Matrix movie is essentially ripped off from a bunch of other stuff. And
yes,
I don't think the Wachowskis they don't deserve as much credit for the creativity of that first movie as they get, because a lot of their stuff is directly like there are some videos out there that do deep dives into like all of this part of the Matrix is pulled right from this, and it's like identical in every way. And that's why I think that once they were forced to continue the story past the first movie, it went downhill.
Yeah.
And I think that part of the problem is that maybe they had some good ideas in the beginning. They meshed them with some good ideas that they kind of stole. And once they were out of those ideas, we get this. So I don't know. I do think that The Matrix has interesting things left to do, but it might be other filmmakers who would be able to pull those interesting things out of that.
I agree. And I feel like when you were saying all this stuff about like, you know, they were going to do this, you know, trans allegory here of somebody coming into the Matrix and coming out a different gender. See, that's the thing. We had this whole conversation when we recorded the episode about the original movie and how like it could be interpreted as an allegory for, you know, transgender individuals. And that is interesting. But I feel like once you no longer make it an interpretation and you make it on the nose, then it's less interesting. Yeah. And I feel like they did that several times in this movie. Like it just felt like even their crew, right? It just felt like they had to throw all of the cliched millennial people in here. Hey, here's a blue-haired woman. Hey, here's an Asian woman. Here's this. Here's this. It feels like, I don't know if you guys have watched any of the Sex and the City reboot.
No.
Just like that. But if they do this thing in a show where it's like, okay, well now we have to give them black friends because they didn't have black friends before. And it's like, no, it's so clear that this is a mandate and it is a thing that somebody in a focus group or like a writer's room is saying and not an actual natural story progression, that it just doesn't work.
I didn't peg you as a Sex and the City fan there, Phil.
I am a TV fan. So the thing is, like, I am very much a person where if I watch something once, I'm a completionist. I have to see where it starts. I have to see where it ends. Like it's weird. Like I've watched several things and I know it's bad, but I'll continue to watch it to the end because I just have to see where it ends.
Oh God, that's how I was with so many things.
So yeah, I feel like at some point, like I watched an entire episode of Sex and the City and I was like, okay, I have to see where this goes. And you know, that ended up me watching the entire season and going, okay, why did I see the season before this? Let me watch that season. And that's kind of how I got into the show.
It's like Cartman singing. If Cartman hears someone singing "Sail Away," he has to finish the entire song word for word. It's like, I can't help it. I have to sing it.
That is one of the funniest bits in South Park. And I do know what you're saying, Phil. I've been like that with other things, but there was a short period where I dated a girl who was obsessed with that show, and I had to watch it when I didn't want to, and it left a very bad taste in my mouth, so I will never watch it again.
So the funny thing about that is that says a lot about who I am as a person, because I bet you if you just looked at me and didn't know anything about me and you asked me which show have I seen, The Wire or Sex and the City, most people would get it wrong because I've never seen an episode of The Wire.
Well, that's one of those shows that I've been meaning to try to get into, but every time I think about it, I'm like, everybody says it's like such an intricate show and I need to really pay attention. I'm just not in the mood for that right now.
My wife watches Grey's Anatomy, and I've walked in on her watching Grey's Anatomy, and after 5 minutes of listening to the god-awful dialogue that's being written for these people to say, I turned to her and I'm like, tell me you're not still enjoying this after all these years. Can you not hear how horrible this is right now? Right now, I've heard better dialogue in a DC film, for crying out loud. You cannot tell me that this is entertaining. And she's like, shut up. Every time you come into the room, I'm watching something I love, you ruin it for me.
So, you know what it is? So I think when you've been with a show for a long time, that show becomes a place of comfort for you.
Yes, you don't hear it.
Yeah.
So I used to know a woman who watched ER from like the very beginning to the very end. And towards the last couple of seasons, she would complain about it a little bit. I'm like, well, why don't you stop watching? She's like, I can't. She's like, this is my show. I've been with it since the beginning. I'm going to watch it until it's over. But like, I want it to be better, so I'll complain about it. But like, there are certain shows that like, yes, they dip in quality, but it's a show that you've been with for so long. Like the last couple seasons of Seinfeld are nothing special, but I'll still watch them if I'm doing a run through of the whole series, just like I'll watch the first god awful season of The Office. if I'm doing a whole run through of that, because it's like, yeah, those first 6 episodes were rough, but they laid the groundwork for what came next.
Yeah, and I mean, I that's what kind of makes this hilariously enough. I kind of walked into a good comparison because when shows like Sex and the City and Sopranos first debuted, like they just kind of changed television.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just like they were like an ongoing show. Like they showed that, television could be more sophisticated. And that was kind of the boom before, Hollywood actors started really coming to television and doing TV shows. So I feel like just HBO's, run of TV shows has just changed the face of television. And I feel like in a lot of ways, The Matrix changed movies. And you even got like when they brought the French character back, I cannot remember his
The
name.
Merovingian.
Yeah, there you go. And he comes back in this episode, in this show, well, not the show, the movie, and he's basically looking at the camera like, you ruined everything. Like movies used to be this. He's not saying that, but that's my interpretation of what he's riffing off of. Is that movies used to be this until the Matrix came along, and now it's like,
and he's
bang,
saying
bang,
it during one of the generic action sequences.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting idea, but the thing that kind of makes that commentary fall apart is this movie is exactly what he's mocking.
Hey, I gotta ask, did either of you even recognize the fact that Christina Ricci's in this movie?
Yes.
I missed that. Where?
She's the female executive who comes in and tells them that they're going to do another Matrix video game. She has like the big red hairdo.
Ah.
She doesn't look anything like Wednesday Addams and all the other things we've seen her in. And she's playing against her type, which is like, she usually plays these kind of down to earth, quiet characters. And in this, she's like super cliche executive lady who just spouts a bunch of business babble. And it took me it took until my second run through where I was like, oh my God, that's Christina Ricci. And like, it was such a small role that I think that's why I missed it the first time, because I probably wasn't paying too much attention to that character.
I noticed it right away, and it goes to everything I've also said about this movie, where it just feels like, hey, here's an obligatory cameo because Christina Ricci has been in another Wachowski movie. Like, it just felt like everything about this movie was going through the motions.
Was she in that Sense8 show or something? What else did she do?
She was in Speed Racer.
Oh, I've never actually watched that movie.
Speed Racer is actually really good. There's a when you look at Speed Racer and you look at the Matrix trilogies, there's a fair criticism to make about how a lot of what makes Wachowski movies is great comes from people of color.
Yeah, and I think it also comes from people who aren't them. Like, the reason the first movie was so beloved is a lot of the action caught people off guard because Hong Kong style action had not made its way here yet.
Very true.
It's the same thing with Speed Racer. It's so heavily based off of anime, and a lot of the things that make it interesting are, visuals from that genre.
And all these other artists that are working on the movie are not the Wachowskis. Like, they know how to hire talented people.
Yeah, and I mean, you could say the same thing about The Matrix. A lot of what makes The Matrix interesting is, like you said, the choreography, some of the allegories in it to religion and some of the allegories to race and gender. All of that stuff is interesting. And again, I just feel like all of that was missing here. Like, none of the things that make that first movie interesting are in this movie.
I know we've already touched on what you guys, what your own personal takes are on the future of this thing. Is there a world in which Keanu and Carrie-Anne Moss step away and this thing is handed to the cast that we saw here, or perhaps another cast, and they continue the story of the Matrix? Or do you think this thing works without Neo and Trinity? What do you think, Phil?
So you're trying to make Saved by the Bell second generation?
First off, if you're obsessed with that show, as a bunch of people are, we got a problem here. Because man, that's a whole other pod for another time. That's like Power Rangers. Don't even get me started on that stuff.
I don't feel like anybody in the new crew is like terrible, but none of them feel interesting enough where I would want to see another movie about them.
That's fair. Have a product or a service that you want to get out into the world? Always wanted to try your hand at podcasting but don't know where to start? We've got you covered. Pod for Hire is a podcast production company that offers turnkey services to fit your needs. We produce your show from start to finish, allowing you the valuable time you require to focus on your established clients as well as prospective clients. We pride ourselves on delivering a top-notch product that will set your business apart from the rest and give your company the exposure it deserves. For more information, give us a call at 1-828-800-9880 or email us at info@podforhire.com. Pod for Hire. We take the work out of podcasting. Chris, does this work without Neo and Trinity or either one of them, actually?
I mean, I think it could, but you couldn't just pick up where they left off with these characters. You'd have to give Neo and Trinity some sort of satisfying send-off, which they, in this movie, just basically set them up as being in the exact same position at the end of the first movie. Like, oh, we're going to go change things. Like, okay, what does that mean? But yeah. I don't know. Like I was saying, like, this could be an opportunity for Warner Brothers to pursue other things. Like the video game option is obviously there. That demo I was talking about, I don't know if you guys have seen anything from that, but the few people I know who played through it were like, it is amazing.
Wow.
Like the graphical quality of it is on another level. And that's just one avenue. The other avenue is obviously animation. The Matrix is already dabbled in that with the Animatrix and the previous video games. There's always comic books, like we've seen Star Wars and Star Trek both continue through comics for many years. So there's a lot of things they could do. They could jump 100 years into the future. Neo and Trinity are long dead, and we're looking at like the beginning of the end of the Matrix. Like, if they're going to tell that story, don't make it now. Make it a long time in the future when the humans actually have maybe the advantage for once.
Yeah. Give us a planet back so we can screw it up again, because that's kind of what we do. So
this movie even sort of relented to the fact that, like, and the original movies touched on this a little bit, but this movie sort of almost, like the original movies, it felt like the machines are the bad guys.
Yeah.
And then in this movie, they're trying to be like, no, we have a symbiotic relationship with the machines now. And this is how, and whether that's supposed to be an interesting statement about our reliance on technology or not is up for debate. But that's another thing about this movie is like, they're basically saying, they're like, yes, we need these things to survive. So then who's the bad guy? Where's the, like, I know it's Neil Patrick Harris, but like, where's the real conflict here? Like, it doesn't seem like you're working towards freeing humanity anymore. And it doesn't seem like that's your overarching goal.
Yeah.
So what are we even doing here? Like, we're just growing strawberries?
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, that's why I was saying that Neil Patrick Harris's character is the big bad of this movie. But what is his game? Like, what is the thing that he is trying to keep in place? If it's the Matrix, then it doesn't seem like anybody's really fighting him on that.
Yeah. It's Keanu and it's Neo and Trinity create so much power, just the two of them. But like, in order to do that, they need to be in some version of the Matrix, like yearning for each other, which is such a convoluted thing. Like, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's a little bit too much dip on the chip, man.
What I'm hearing here is that both you guys are anti-love. That's what I'm hearing. Because again, these two wacky kids with their trench coats and the hair and the stuff
and their sunglasses.
Yes, don't forget the sunglasses.
At least they weren't quite as egregious with all the leather and
yeah.
Like, I was wondering, are they going to fall back into that? But no, Bugs was just wearing like a bunch of goofy clothes, and so was everybody else. Like, you know, Morpheus definitely had a little bit of a glow up and is wearing some more like designer suits, and He's not just in a snakeskin jacket and black vest anymore.
Well, so all right, so Chris, you've opened the door, so now you're gonna have to walk through it. What are you wearing in the Matrix? I mean, be honest. Are you gothing out? Are you doing something cool? Are you doing something that you would never dare to wear in real life? Or we're talking about a Superman suit or a Batman suit? What are you going for?
So, in my personal life, I am a very I don't care about fashion at all. I did when I was younger. Like I used to when I was in like high school and early college years, like I was so preppy. I was like a Backstreet Boy. But
wow.
Nowadays it's like t-shirt and jeans and maybe like a flannel.
Yeah.
You know, just very basic. I have no desire to look crazy in any way. So yeah, my Matrix outfit is like if I could do anything, it's just a pair of jeans and a Howard the Duck shirt. We'll go with that.
You could do that now. It's just people look at you. That's all. It's
Yeah.
Phil, what do you got? What do you think? What's your Matrix suit of choice?
I think that I would essentially just walk around every day in like very loud and colorful Seth Rollins suits.
That's good. That's good.
9 different patterns of plaid.
Just tons of patterns, tons of florals. Yeah, and just everything with sneakers on it, like foam posits and like SB Dunks.
I was thinking either the powder blue or the orange tugs from Dumb and Dumber. That's what I'm thinking. The top hat, the cane, everything. Just
there you
just
go.
as annoying as possible. Well, kids, that's not the whole movie, but that's the thrust of it right there. So I know we've made you want to go watch it now, for sure. So yeah, that's it's a different one, kids. It's not. I'm not going to sit here and say I hated it, but I'm not going to sit here and say I loved it. When it ended the first time, I said, "Yeah, I'm about to go back and watch this again because I feel really stupid right now. What am I missing?" And then upon watching it for the second time, I'm like, I don't know if I missed anything. I don't know if I'm stupid that much. Like maybe there wasn't anything higher going on here above my IQ level. Maybe it was just that there wasn't really anything, but it just really felt like there was. Maybe that's my takeaway from this film to begin with, or to end with, I should say. So, Chris, take this thing home from me, my friend. What's your final word on The Matrix Resurrections?
If you have 2.5 hours you need to fill and you're already subscribed to HBO and you've already seen all the other things HBO has to offer, this isn't a terrible way to fill some time, but it's definitely not gonna be the most satisfying experience for a diehard Matrix fan.
There's not exactly what I call a ringing endorsement, but we'll take it. So, Phil, what you got, my friend?
I feel like this is them attempting to put Neo in a existential crisis after, essentially saving the world. But instead, we have an existential crisis as to why did this movie exist. And yeah, that's where I am at the end of this movie. By the end of it, I just was wondering, why was this made? And I feel like that is going to be the most interesting thing to come out of this, is all of the think pieces and all of the reviews and reactions asking, why was this thing made? All of that is going to be more interesting than the actual movie was.
And I agree with both you guys. Actually, my points come from both of your closing arguments here for sure. Look, kids, as we have said here on the 6M a few different times now in the past, just because the thing that you love has been remade, or there's a sequel, or there's a show, and it sucks, does not mean that the thing that you love has gone away. So if you don't like this movie, you don't have to like it. Go back and watch the original and remember how cool it was the first time you watched it, because I've done that. I love the first one, and it is ingenious, and there is a lot of great stuff to take from that, even if it wasn't all the Wachowskis that did it to begin with. But it's ahead of its time in many, many ways. It does still stand out. It did revolutionize the film industry, in my opinion, especially the sci-fi portion of it. So no, it's not gone anywhere. It's still there, guys. Go enjoy it. Everyone go enjoy it. It's fine. You don't have to like this one, which is good, because I don't think the three of us particularly enjoyed it. So, but not, again, kids, your childhood is still there. For God's sake, go enjoy it and don't get too hung up on what Hollywood does next. In the meantime, I still lobby for another Constantine film because I do love me some Keanu Reeves. I can't help it. But we'll see what happens in the future. But in the meantime, that is The Matrix Resurrections. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 6M Podcast. We'll see you next time.